Hello, and welcome to Ending Physician Overwhelm. I'm your host, Dr. Megan Mello. I'm a family and obesity medicine physician, as well as a certified life coach for physicians. In this podcast, we talk about how the learned habits of people-pleasing, perfectionism, and a lack of boundaries show up in our lives and how they contribute to burnout, exhaustion, and overwhelm. The healthcare system is broken, my friends, but let's not wait for it to be fixed in order to feel better. Hello, my friends, and welcome to today's episode. Today, we're going to be talking about how to make things easier. Now, when we think about this question, right, how do we make things easier? It's not always a natural thing for us to ask ourselves. I know for me, my brain, left to its own devices, wants to create a beautiful, elaborate, complicated system that produces wow results. And I can take that thought with me to all the arenas of my life. And it's funny because if you actually ask me to tell you about a time when this worked out well, what happened and what did I create? I'm not going to be able to come up with anything really. Because, have I come up with complicated systems? Yes. Have they made my life easier? No. Did they produce amazing results that had me addicted to using these systems? I don't think so. Yet, conversely, when I make things easier for myself and I commit to a simple process that I can show up for again and again, I usually get a good enough result on a consistent basis. And really, for so many of the parts of our lives, yes, even us with a perfectionist habit, a good enough result in most things is truly good enough. Now, let's take an example. Let's look at this podcast. Is it good enough that people are listening? Yes. We actually just crossed the 11,000 downloads milestone. Is it fancy and highly edited? Not at all. Would it be better if it was? Maybe if I invested more resources, had better sound quality, had an editing team? Maybe. But since this is one of many tasks that I do in my life in general and to support physicians trying to share helpful information, and it's not my main gig, what I do have is a consistent, good enough podcast with content that isn't at all complicated to create, like household chores and clinical notes and maybe, the knitting or art projects you undertake to keep your hands busy. There are so many areas of our life where this good enough and keep it simple concept applies. And yet, how many of us are stressed out about these same things, tying ourselves in knots, creating complicated systems for getting things done, maybe comparing ourselves to others, improving them, trying to make things go just so. That all ends today. Because I think that you'll see that once you decide you're going to make life simpler, whatever you start to focus on, whether at work or at home, you're sure to get hooked on the simplifying process and you'll start to use it over and over again. So let's dive in, shall we? Now, before we launch into the steps that help us to simplify things, let's address the elephant in the room. You don't have to make any changes at all. If you have systems in place and they're working well and you feel good, or maybe you don't have any systems at all and it seems to be working fine, and maybe you don't want to believe that anything different is possible, you are 100% free to just stop the episode right here. Maybe you have things all figured out already. Maybe you don't care. Maybe you aren't bothered by complicated systems. You love them, or you feel great about how things are going right now. Maybe you don't believe that it's possible to make your life easier. Whatever it is, you can choose to keep everything that you have and do just as they are right now. It sounds silly to say, but what I'm talking about is optional, and it's important to identify that. But if you are listening and your response is, oh, yes, please help because I'm drowning, then keep listening. Because many of us high-achieving rock stars that we are, and often we don't believe that we are, but we are, Many of us are used to complicated systems and believing that we have to work harder if things aren't working out for us. This is especially true if you've worked in a heavily bureaucratic clinical setting where, changes that seem obvious to you as a way to improve patient care or safety have been shot down, right? Leaders have said no. And when we witness that over and over again, the churn of systems creating complicated patient flows, treatment algorithms, making care more fractured, et cetera, it can leave us feeling that complicated is just the way it is, or that things can't change. I'm here to say that that's just not how it is, right? Let's let the bureaucracy be what it is, but let's look at this in our own lives. So keeping your current systems is a choice, and you're free to make it. But if you're interested in other options, listen on. So step 1, pick a current problem that is frustrating you. Let's think of something that is currently happening to you and happening on a regular enough basis, causing some stress, something that you have some control over. Now, you might initially say to me, I don't have control over anything. You don't understand my life, but slow down. Yes, you do. And I get it. For example, you don't have control generally over whether or not you do patient notes, right? If you're a doctor, you're going to be doing patient notes in some regard. But you do have some control over how and when they get done. Laundry. Yes, it's not generally legal for people to go out naked in public. So laundry is going to be created by the people in your house over and over again, and by you. They are making dirty laundry, the people in your house, as we speak right now. And even if you just pulled a load of laundry out of the dryer and you folded it and you put it away, they are still making dirty laundry for you right now, as are you. Dirty laundry is coming again. The problem could be around meal planning, or when you get those emails inviting you to join a committee. Pick any of these places to start and think about what it is that is causing the frustration or whatever the negative emotion is, right? Why does this bother you? Not in a sarcastic way, not in a gaslighting way, just what comes up. And when do you notice that feeling, right? When is it coming up? In what part of the occurrence, right? What part of it feels like too much work or seems overly complicated? Maybe you're the person in the house who does the laundry for everyone, and you never know when they're out of clean socks until it is suddenly an emergency, right? If you have kids, you know what I'm talking about, right? All of a sudden, oh my God, Mom, there's no socks. Maybe your staff comes to you multiple times per day with questions. They knock on the door when you're in an exam room. They come to your desk when you're trying to focus, and it leaves you feeling really distracted. And most of the time, what they're coming to you with is not at all emergent. It's not even really urgent, really, right? When we think about it in the pure medical sense, right? Pick one of these areas that you want to start, right? Something that's bothering you that you want to make easier. Step 2, check in. So this step is going to apply, but it's not always going to apply to every situation. So just hang on with me here. Is this problem important? And how important is it to you? Now, again, there are some issues that you may not have a lot of control over. For example, again, if you are a physician, right, you have to write patient notes in some sense. Maybe you have a scribe, maybe you dictate, maybe you're handwriting, maybe you're typing, but we don't usually get to opt out of notes, right? So we have to put that part of it aside, right? It is decided by the systems that be, right, that notes and documentation are important. But there are some elements of the note that you do get to decide about. So hang with me for it. So we need to ask ourselves the question, is it important? And how important is it to you? And we need to check on this, but most importantly here is that we are going to be able to identify some things that we are spending mental energy on And it turns out that those things either don't matter at all or they don't matter to you. So again, we're putting notes aside for a minute, but think about issues like whether or not people have matching socks, putting up holiday decorations. There are lots of little things that can come up that can bother us and seem like stressors, and we get to decide, do we care? So we can absolutely come up with relatively easy systems for these problems, right? And we can come back to that. But first, we have to decide whether it's important, right? Is it necessary in some way? Is there a consequence of not doing that thing? And if it's not necessarily important in general, you get to decide whether or not you care about it. Because maybe you have lots of holiday decorations and it's always a big chore to put them up and you always forget or it's last minute and you're stressing because, oh, they're not up. And maybe you also know that you don't actually care if there are decorations up, right? Maybe you have a bunch of decorations. Maybe it was important for your family growing up. Maybe all the neighbors put up elaborate displays, and yet you just don't care. You're not interested. That is 100% valid here, right? Because no one would say that their life depends on holiday decorations, right? We have a great frame of reference for that. We can decide that in general, it is not important in the survival of humans, right, to put up holiday decorations. And you can decide that it's also not important to you. Now, conversely, it might be very important to you. You might say, yep, I will absolutely survive without holiday decorations, but I love them. That's different. We can still create an easy system for that, but I want you to see here that there are some things that you are fretted about that you can choose to let go. It is 100% valid to decide that you just don't care and you're going to let this problem go. You're not even going to bother to come up with a solution other than to figure out, where am I going to donate these decorations, right? I want them out of my house because I no longer want to think I'm ever going to put them up because I simply don't care, right? That is 100% legit. If you decide that it is important or that you do care, then you get to decide whether it needs you attending to it, whether you can share the task. Maybe it's important to somebody else and you can get their buy-in on it. Maybe you can delegate it completely. Do be kind and make sure that when you think it's important enough that it should be done, you do that step before you give that job to somebody else. Don't give someone a job that you know is not important at all and not important to you, right? If you owned your own practice, right? If this is a work issue, if you owned your own business, would you pay somebody to do that job, right? If it's something that is legally, medical legally necessary, right? It's part of documentation, it's part of record keeping, it's part of safe patient care. Okay, you're going to need to pay somebody to do that if you want to own your own practice. But if it's some little task that just isn't important and it's not worth your time or paying someone else to do it, can you just let it go, right? Don't give completely unimportant, unnecessary tasks to people, right? Just let it go. Next step, the magic question. So a client recently recommended the podcast called The Lazy Genius by Kendra Adachi. And I happened to find her book, The Lazy Genius Way, which I am really enjoying. And she has a magic question, which is, how can I make this easier? So once we've done the first steps of figuring out that we have a problem to solve and taking ownership, deciding that's important in general or important to us, then comes the creative part. How can I make this easier? When you aren't used to asking this question, because high achievers are usually trying to produce bigger, grander results, not looking to solve small nagging problems, the first time, and maybe many times after that, you ask them, your brain will just keep saying, I don't know. Keep asking. Sit down and brainstorm with yourself or anyone else who's involved. How can we make this easier, right? If you have some kind of elaborate clinical system and staff are constantly falling down and not being able to follow through on steps, maybe it's time for a meeting to say, how do we streamline this? How do we identify the really important elements? How do we coach for performance and make sure everyone understands? How do we make sure it gets done, right? Rather than just continuing to beat your head against the wall or doing it for other people because it takes too much time to try and help them, right? We need to get other people involved and decide that it's worth making it easier. The more you ask yourself, how do I make this easier? The more you send your brain a message, right, that you're on a mission to answer that question. The more you do this, the easier it gets. And it gets easier and easier and a little bit more fun even to make things easier in your life. So let's talk through some examples. A client of mine noticed that every time she got a message from staff, and it was usually a direct message that is now available in Epic, right? So it could be in the middle of a patient visit, or when she was, tuned into some other element of patient care, she would get frequent messages about double books, right? Oh, can I double book this person? Oh, where should we squeeze this in, right? And it was always interrupting her flow. She was working on setting boundaries in order to be able to get home to her young daughter, and her days were already quite full. She was already working in extra people. She knew that she wanted to say no to double books, especially because she didn't actually have a medical assistant working with her most days, right? So she was cleaning rooms, she was rooming her own patients, doing all that work, right? She didn't have the capacity to see more patients. So she knew that she was going to say no. And she had tried talking to the staff before, trying to make it very clear she doesn't take double books, but they continued to come at her, asking her and interrupting her with these messages. Now, lots of issues around that, but she didn't control what other people could do, right? What she could do was to have an easy, smart phrase in her medical record that she could say no very quickly by just a few keystrokes. And it was a clear, consistent, kind message, right? So each time she got a ping asking if they could double book, she would immediately respond with this very clear, polite, simple message. No, I'm sorry, we're not able to do that. If it's really urgent, the patient needs to go, blah, 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 right? Now, she couldn't control whether she received these many messages, and she had tried, but she could control how she responded, and she could make it easier to do so. So she had decided to say no in advance, right? But each time these were coming through, she felt she had to draft, a custom response until she decided to make it easier and make a special phrase for herself. And yes, sometimes the frustration will still happen, but then she could easily remember, right, that she had an easy solution at the ready. Now, could we argue that the system should be more respectful and kind? 100% absolutely. Do we feel like we have control over that? No. But again, this is a little example, right, where an employed physician can make something easier for themselves, right? They can make the decision and make it easier. And again, the system is very challenging. It's very difficult and pushes very hard on physicians and many staff. But doing these little steps can make things a lot easier and take out some of the drama, right? The answer is just a clear no. Now, let's move on to something that's perhaps a little less loaded. Maybe not, I guess. Let's get back to laundry. If you're currently the one who does the household laundry, maybe not just everyone's clothes, but also sheets and towels and anything else that needs washing, let's look at how to make this easier. Now, the answer is going to vary based on who else lives at home, how old are they, what's their ability to participate. But most of the time, even with very young children, at least some of these people can help you in some way. Maybe right now, everyone has dirty laundry all over their rooms, all over the house. And when it's time to run the washer, right now, what happens is that you have to go around picking up all the things in all the rooms, bringing them to the washer, and, you don't find out until the last minute, that someone is out of socks, or they need their, special t-shirt before tomorrow, right? This can be exhausting and frustrating, and it seems unfair, right? Because maybe you're keeping up on top of your things, but you don't know when they need that shirt or they're out of socks, right? And it often leads to a lot of resentment, right? We can agree that for most of us, we probably all agree that clean clothes are important, right? We've decided on that one. What can we do to make it easier? Lots of different ways to go, right? Perhaps you decide to tell everyone that you're going to wash the clothes, but you're no longer going to gather them up. So if you tell everyone, hey, I'm going to run the washing machine in 20 minutes, they have a chance to get their dirty stuff in there now, or, they miss out and they need to do it on their own time. Maybe the answer is getting baskets or hampers and having them in a few places in the house, and all the dirty laundry that is going to be washed is, going to happen when the baskets are full. And you're not going to run loads otherwise, right? Maybe you have enough clothes for each person in the house to have, 10 days worth of clean clothes, but you're going to run the laundry once a week, right, on the same day, so that in theory, there's always a few extra days, right? So it's still their responsibility to make sure that they get their clothes in the hamper, but there's not going to be any of those emergencies. Maybe you teach your 9-year-old how to start helping with the laundry, right? How to run their own clothes. Maybe you decide to pay someone to do laundry for you. You can see there are lots of different solutions. And the point here is that there are many, many, many ways that you can make this easier. And we can see it as important, right? And we can decide, well, I don't want to put any energy into that. I just want to stick with what I'm currently doing. But we can also decide that we want a new way, and we can ask ourselves the question, how to make it easier. We're not going to need to probably spend hours problem solving this, right? Sometimes it means getting help. Sometimes it means conversations with the people that live with you, or, other stakeholders if we're talking about staff at clinic. Sometimes it means streamlining the task in some way, right? Or a new tool to make it easier, right? If matching socks is important to people, maybe everybody needs the same couple colors of socks, or maybe just one color of socks, right? But if we don't bother to think about it at all, we're not going to stumble usually upon an easier solution, right? If we just grumble and moan and think, well, I'm just stuck with this, then we will be stuck with it, right? It's just going to continue. And I don't want to suggest that every task is going to become magical or, this creative whirlwind or super fun, right? That's just not reality. But if you turn on the problem-solving part of your brain, right, onto these common frustrations, we can often come up with something that makes it easier, or sometimes even decide that it's just not important. It's just not something we're going to continue to do. So let's recap. There are many little nagging problems that we can first identify, what the thing is and what the thing is that's bothering us and why. We can next decide whether it's important in general, important to us, and, either move to problem solving and decide, what we're going to do to make it easier, or we can decide to stop doing it if it's not important. And that magic question, how can I make this easier? Even when we feel like we don't have a lot of control over whether or not a particular task needs to happen, we do often have control over how it gets done. And that can make a big difference. Conversely, there's also going to be things here that we identify that are important, but don't need to be done by us. And we might need to let go a little, or a lot, maybe, depending on what it is. We might need to let go of how they get done. So, yes, maybe I am able to get extra items into the dishwasher compared to other people, right? So I can choose either that I'm the only one who loads the dishwasher, or I can say, that's not really super critical. I'd rather have everyone's help. And it's important to me that everybody participates in loading the dishwasher. And so I'm going to let go of the need for it to be done my way, right? I can also coach for performance, right? And tell myself that I'm trading some time and energy to do that. for the frustration of feeling like I'm the only one who ever does it. Yes, maybe I wouldn't wear mismatched socks, but maybe my kids don't care, right? And I can stop caring if they have mismatched socks or not. Or, as above, I can make all their socks the same color, right? There's lots of different ways to address that problem. Maybe there's some data entry thing at work that needs to happen, but it doesn't have to happen by you. You can let that go, right? Maybe you're going to task it to a staff member. Maybe we've decided that it is important, but it doesn't need to be done by you. Maybe the staff member is going to end up batching the task, right? And maybe that's just fine. It's not the way that you would do it because your workflow is different, but it makes more sense for them. Great. As long as that's not affecting patient care, right? It's probably not something that needs to happen right now, right? If it's some little data entry thing, we can let that go. We can do hard things, my friends. And we don't need everything we do to be hard. We really don't. Decide to make as much as possible in your life easy. Maybe every Tuesday is Taco Tuesday, and you never have to think about what to have for dinner on Tuesday. Maybe when you're researching travel plans, you decide you're only going to look at 3 choices and you just pick. You don't make it complicated. Maybe you have a no thank you email drafted that you can tweak so that every time you get one of those emails about, here's your great opportunity to join this committee, you can simply reply easily. Now, I could go on, and my temptation is to go on and give you a whole bunch of stuff, but I'm going to let that go, and I'm going to keep it easy for myself right here, right now. So if you want more ideas and a deeper dive on doing this work, I do highly recommend checking out the Lazy Genius podcast or the book, The Lazy Genius Way by Kendra Adachi, and you'll get lots more ideas and lots more of a deep dive, like I said, kind of on this issue in general. But we can decide to make things easier, right? Yes, we may have to get out of our own way. We may need to let go of an idea that a system has to be sophisticated to be good, right? We might just need to decide, you know what, this is good enough. And once I let go of my worry about it, it really will be off my mind. You can let yourself take the easy way out on lots of these things and feel your frustration levels drop. Remember, if you are a longtime listener of the podcast, right, we talk about the habit of perfectionism and how for many, many of us, this was trained into us, right? And trained into us for very specific reasons, right? So that we don't miss things when we're taking care of patients, right? That we don't have as many safety issues, right? That we're doing things in a particular way, right? You think about the OR checklist, right? We have many examples where systems, complicated or otherwise, help to avoid mistakes. But much of the time, we can make things easier still, right? Much of the time, we don't need this perfectionism to show up in the rest of our lives. And when we learn to let it go, when we learn to decide that no one is going to pass away because they don't have clean socks, then we can decrease our stress levels tremendously, right? So sorry to talk so much about socks, but I know that many of us out there stress about little things. And so today we're just using the socks. All right, my friends, thank you so much for listening and tuning in. And until next time, take care and feel free to make things easier.
Well, that's our show for today. Thank you as always for listening. To learn more about my coaching programs, head to www.healthierforgood.com. And if you love this podcast, please drop us a review on iTunes or support the show by clicking the link in the show notes. Until next time, take care.